Space. It is a final frontier for humanity, a mystery to not just the old, but is also in the hearts and the minds of the young. And no matter what country we all come from, there are elements of looking above towards the future and wondering where we all fit in the grand scheme of life. But today on FTD Facts, we are going to talk about a program that has put the very heart and soul into an atmosphere that is naturally hazardous to us. And here on FTD Facts, we've started to skim into Russian culture, but myself and the rest of the team felt like we should talk about the biggest space programs in the entire world. And that is the Russian space program. So hey guys, what's going on? My name is Dave Walpa and welcome to FTD Facts. This is a channel, well, you guys probably already know it if you guys are regular viewers. This is a channel where we talk about people, places, and cultures from around the world, but today, well, we talked about the Indian space program not too long ago, so I figured let's talk about the Russian space program because it's really fascinating and you guys might be surprised at what they've accomplished. Before the Russian space program, known to many in the past as the USSR, Soviet Space Program, but today has evolved to become the Russian Federal Space Agency, or RFSA. Now you could say that the two programs are almost separate from each other because the RFSA began on February 25th, 1992, and as for the Soviet program, it started all the way back in the 30s. But before we can really get into some cool facts about the Soviet space program, we need to understand where it all came from. We need to learn about its origins. Back in the 1800s, because of scientists such as Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who inspired the Russian Empire to look into space as an academic, he helped evolve a group of scientists to create a group called the GIRD on September 15th, 1931. Now it stood for the Group for Study of Reactive Motion, and these group of guys created the world's first rocket program, eventually creating the GIRD-9, which was the first liquid-fueled rocket and the first hybrid rocket being the GIRD-X, created on November 25th, 1933. But unfortunately at this time it was still quite a ways before it became a space program. During the Second World War, the Russians had captured scientists and plans for the V-2 rocket program that was created by the Germans, which eventually led to the creation of the world's first and Russia's first intercontinental ballistic missile. And it was called the R-Semyorka, which was built in 1957. Now, unlike NASA, the Soviet space program was heavily fused with the Russian military. And although Sergei Kirillov, who was the father of the Russian atomic bomb, was working under the military, he kept his goals of space exploration secret from them. And the rocket and space program was second in military spending because the military needed ICMs. And even though the idea of space exploration was pretty much laughable at the time, they did indeed release Sputnik 1, which was the first satellite to ever leave the Earth, putting it into a low orbit on October 4th of 1957. Although Sputnik 1 was the first satellite ever, it didn't have any sensory equipment. But however, because they tracked and studied Sputnik, it gave scientists ideas of how the upper atmosphere and orbit works. And although the Soviet space program was behind the United States, who put a monkey into orbit by 1948, they were the first country to put a dog in space, and more importantly, it was the first animal to ever orbit the planet. The dog's name was Laika, and she was a stray dog found on the streets of Moscow, and she was launched into space in Sputnik 2 on November 3rd, 1957. However, unfortunately, Laika died in the spacecraft due to overheating because of equipment failure. And for some, many viewed Sputnik as the future of space exploration, but for some, it screamed fear. The Sputnik program had become good propaganda to fuel the Cold War, which in turn fueled the space race. This era was known as the Sputnik Crisis, and America had become quite fearful of Russia's new achievements, and therefore because of Russia, that is why NASA was created. Now if you were to compare NASA to the Russia program, you'd probably say NASA's bigger and better because they landed people on the moon. But before they landed anybody on the moon, Russia had achieved much more. First of all, they were the first program to ever put a man and a woman into space. The first astronaut or cosmonaut to ever go into space was Yuri Gagarin, who flew way past the atmosphere on April 12, 1961 in the Vostok 1 space capsule. He was also put into an orbit at 161 kilometers above sea level and flew around the Earth in orbit for 108 minutes. And what I find really crazy about that is because Yuri was only 27 years old, which most people will credit Sally Ride as the youngest astronaut, but if you want to be technical, Sally was 33, and I mean Yuri, yeah, he was like 27. But to top both of them, German Titov was a 25-year-old cosmonaut when he went up into space in Vostok 2. He was also the second person to orbit the planet and was the fourth person in space because the Americans had sent up 2 people in between Vostok 1 and Vostok 2. But as for females, not too long after, on June 6, 1963, Valentina Tereshkova went up in Vostok 6, being the first female astronaut to ever reach space. Between the years of the 1960s to the 1980s, the Russian program had some really cool achievements, some of which you probably would maybe say NASA did first. They were the first country to send a probe to the moon and take photos on the far side of the moon, and these were with spacecraft Luna 2 and 3, which launched in 1959. On February 12, 1961, the Soviets launched Venera 1, which was the first program to reach Venus and beyond. And to keep in mind with Sergei Korolov's desire to reach Mars, they launched Mars 1, 2, and 3 probes to the planet, with Mars 2 being the first man-made object to reach Mars and impact the surface on November 27, 1971. And to this day, they really don't have an idea where Mars 2 landed because they unfortunately lost contact with it. However, Mars 3 properly landed on the planet on December 3rd, 1971, and they do still know where that one is. But for 1 second, let's just jump back to the Venera programs, because Venera 9 was the first probe to land successfully onto Venus and take photos of the surface. But as years went by, the space program continued to add more records, but 2 of the most important were Salyut 1, which was the first space station to be put into orbit on April 19, 1971. And approximately 15 years later, on February 19, 1986, launched from Proton K rockets, was the Mir space station, which was the first permanently manned space station to be put together from a bunch of different modules. And for the longest time, Mir had the longest continuous presence of human beings on a space station. It lasted 3,644 days. However, unfortunately, those records were beaten by the records put on the ISS space station. However, to this day, astronaut-cosmonaut Valery Polyakov has spent the most amount of time in space in Mir, and that came into a total of 437 days. But all this comes after they set the record for having the first astronauts or cosmonauts to spend a year in space, and those cosmonauts were Vladimir Titov and Musa Manarov. Also, let's not forget about the Buran space shuttle, which was, well, Russia's space shuttle. It completed its test run on November 15, 1988, and she completed a successful unmanned mission having 3.5 hours in space, until she came safely back down to Site 251, which is now Yubileyny Airfield. And unfortunately, the space shuttle program couldn't continue due to the fact that it was too expensive for the military. And although the Buran space shuttle never got a second test, it was the first shuttle to ever launch and land while being completely automated and unmanned. However, the costs for a second test and future tests were cancelled due to the fact that Russia had entered into a time when it was dissolving its military, known as the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which became complete on December 26, 1991, thus ending the Soviet space program, a program which we have just started to learn so much about because there is so much to learn from the scientists behind this great program. But my name is Dave Walpole, and I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Before you guys get out of here, first of all, I want to let you guys know, sign up for Grammarly.com because you guys can help us out. They're one of our sponsors. It helps us create more really cool videos for you guys to watch and learn about. Their program is totally free. Better yet, if you do subscribe with them, that helps us out even more. Other than that, you can check out our Patreon page. There'll be something about that at the end of this video. And of course, here on FTD Facts, we take recommendations for future videos, so leave a suggestion down there because we want to look into it. Especially if you know something more about your country, feel free to write to us at ftdfacts@gmail.com. However, this has been us talking about the Soviet space program, a program that brought a future not just to Russia's past, but to the entire world. From its introduction, it changed the world forever, either inspiring fear or hope to reach the stars. And if not for the great intellectuals of the Russian space program, we probably wouldn't have most of the technologies we have today, such as satellites and even possibly your very own cell phone. And although the old Soviet program is long away, it brought in the birth of the RFSA, a program that works in unity with other space programs and cultures from all around the world. However, that is a story for another time. Hey guys, thanks again for watching this video. Once again, feel free to check out our Patreon, because if you guys support us, we give you guys access to exclusive content that is not available on YouTube. Also, if you like this video, check out our video on the ISRO, which is the Indian Space Program. It was really cool to learn about something there too. And of course, if you're a Russian and you want to learn more about Russian culture, or you're just fascinated about Russian culture, why don't you learn about St. Petersburg? Beautiful city, beautiful people, beautiful everything. But other than that, I'm Dave Wapple, and thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Later, skaters!